The 1970s didn't just make horror scarier, it made it personal. After a decade scarred by Vietnam, the Manson murders, and Watergate, fear stopped hiding behind monsters and started looking uncomfortably real. Filmmakers traded campy gimmicks for psychological dread, suburban nightmares, and questions about faith, safety, and sanity. It was a time when the American dream began to crack, and the horrors of the decade slipped through. Some of these films still make me switch on a light. Others I rewatch just to feel that chill again. Today we're counting down 10 1970s horror classics that changed the genre forever. Drop your favorite in the comments. Now let's revisit the decade that redefined fear. Before Jaws, the ocean was thrilling. After Jaws, it was terrifying. Steven Spielberg's breakout hit turned a simple story, a seaside town terrorized by a great white shark, into a global phenomenon. What made it unforgettable wasn't what you saw, but what you didn't. The malfunctioning shark forced Spielberg to rely on suggestion, music, and pacing, and that accidental restraint created unbearable suspense. John Williams's two-note score alone could raise your pulse, and the film's slow build transformed fear into an art form. It wasn't just a monster movie, it was a masterclass in tension. Jaws didn't just change how we looked at the water, it changed Hollywood itself. The summer blockbuster was born, and audiences learned that terror could be elegant. Even now, whenever I swim, I can still hear that faint dun-dun, dun-dun echoing in the back of my mind. But while Jaws made us afraid of the sea, the next film showed what happens when nature's revenge crawls onto land. Eco-horror reached its strangest point with Prophecy, a film that blended monster mayhem with an environmental warning. Set in the misty forests of Maine, it follows a group investigating pollution from a paper mill, only to discover a terrifying, mutated creature born from human negligence. It's part creature feature, part cautionary tale, and while the effects may look dated, the message feels disturbingly current. What makes Prophecy stand out is its sincerity. Beneath the camp and chaos, it's really about guilt, humanity paying the price for what it's done to nature. The eerie wilderness, the grim tone, and the moral undercurrent make it more unsettling than it gets credit for. It's not as polished as Jaws, but it lingers. And speaking of horror moving closer to home, our next film brought terror straight into the American suburbs and right through the front door. If Jaws made you fear the ocean, the Amityville Horror made you fear your own living room. Based on the infamous true story of the Lutz family, it follows a young couple who move into their dream home in Amityville, New York, unaware it was once the scene of a brutal murder. Soon, their peaceful new life unravels as an unseen force takes hold of the house and them. Whether fact or fiction, it struck a nerve. In the 1970s, when families were already questioning faith and security, Amityville turned the idea of home sweet home into a nightmare. The glowing attic windows, the slow dread, the sense of corruption seeping through the walls, it all felt too real. It wasn't just another haunted house film. It was America's suburban nightmare made flesh. But while Amityville haunted suburbia across the Atlantic, a very different kind of evil was quietly waiting in the woods. Few films unsettle like The Wicker Man, a sunlit nightmare that proved horror doesn't need darkness to terrify. When a devout police officer travels to a remote Scottish island searching for a missing girl, he finds a community devoted to ancient pagan rituals, and smiling just a little too wide. There's no blood, no jump scares, just a slow tightening of dread. The songs are cheerful, the fields are bright, but everything feels wrong. That contrast is what makes it unforgettable. It's a battle of belief, one man's rigid faith against an entire island's chilling devotion to nature. By the time the truth is revealed, it's too late. The horror isn't just what happens, it's how inevitable it feels. But while The Wicker Man whispered its horrors through ritual and song, our next story screamed them from a high school gym in blood. Carrie turned teenage pain into pure horror. Adapted from Stephen King's first novel and directed by Brian De Palma, it follows shy, bullied Carrie White, tormented by her classmates and controlled by her fanatically religious mother. When she discovers her telekinetic powers, the result is one of the most shocking and iconic finales in horror history. Sissy Spacek's performance carries the film, fragile, innocent, and terrifyingly powerful. You don't just watch Carrie's humiliation, you feel it. Every cruel prank and whispered insult builds to that infamous prom night, where laughter turns to screams and vengeance burns through glitter and blood. What makes Carrie timeless isn't just the horror, it's the heartbreak. It captures the cruelty of adolescence, the loneliness of being different, and the danger of repression. Carrie isn't evil. She's what happens when cruelty finally snaps. The film proved horror could be tragic, emotional, and devastatingly human. But while Carrie burned down the prom, the next film unleashed something even darker, a horde of the undead and a brutal mirror of society itself. When George A. Romero released Dawn of the Dead, he didn't just bring zombies back, he gave them purpose. Set inside a shopping mall, the film follows survivors barricading themselves from the apocalypse, surrounded by the undead who wander the stores as if still chasing old habits. It's gruesome, darkly funny, and disturbingly smart. Romero turned the zombie genre into biting social commentary. These weren't just monsters, they were us. Mindless consumers trapped in routine, devouring everything in sight. Even the survivors, clinging to luxury and comfort, couldn't escape their own vanity. The mall becomes a perfect metaphor for 1970s America, polished on the outside, decaying underneath. With groundbreaking makeup by Tom Savini, Dawn of the Dead shocked audiences with gore they'd never seen before, but it also made them think. It was thrilling, grotesque, and uncomfortably relevant. Nearly 50 years later, it still is. Every shambling figure in that mall reminds us that horror's most terrifying reflection isn't the monsters outside. It's the emptiness inside. But while Romero's undead feasted on society's flaws, a group of unlucky travelers in Texas were about to discover a horror much more human and much more real. Few films feel as raw or as real as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Shot on a shoestring budget in the blistering Texas heat, Tobe Hooper's nightmare followed a group of friends who stumble upon a family of cannibals deep in the countryside. What they find isn't just horror, it's madness, decay, and the death of innocence. There's barely any blood, yet it feels drenched in violence. The handheld camera work, the sweat, the screaming, it all feels too real, like we're watching something we shouldn't. Leatherface, wielding his roaring chainsaw and wearing a mask of human skin, became an instant icon of terror. Not a supernatural monster, but something far worse, human. Underneath the chaos, Texas Chainsaw reflects the fractured America of the 1970s, a country disillusioned by war and corruption, where the line between sanity and savagery had worn thin. It wasn't just scary, it was sickeningly believable. Nearly 50 years later, it still feels like a descent into hell, hot, loud, and unforgettable. But just when horror seemed trapped on Earth, one film looked to the stars and discovered something far more terrifying waiting in the dark. In space, no one can hear you scream. It's one of the most chilling taglines in movie history. And Ridley Scott's Alien more than lived up to it. What begins as a slow, eerie science fiction story aboard the Nostromo quickly turns into one of the most claustrophobic and terrifying experiences ever put on film. A crew responding to a mysterious distress signal lands on a desolate planet and brings back something they never should have touched. The result is a creature that redefined cinematic horror. The Xenomorph, a perfect organism designed by artist H.R. Giger, equal parts beautiful and grotesque. The film's pacing is masterful. The dread builds quietly, layer by layer, until it's too late to escape. But what truly set Alien apart was its atmosphere, that cold, industrial spaceship filled with shadows and silence. You can almost hear the hum of the engines, the hiss of air through metal corridors, the heartbeat of fear. And at the center of it all stands Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, not just a survivor, but a new kind of heroine. Strong, capable, and human, Ripley became the template for every final girl who followed. Alien fused two genres, science fiction and horror, into something visionary. It reminded audiences that isolation can be scarier than any monster, and that sometimes the vastness of space isn't freedom. It's a trap. But before horror left Earth behind, one film turned our quiet, tree-lined suburbs into places where safety no longer existed, and where evil could wear a human face. Few films in history have done more with less. John Carpenter's Halloween was made on a shoestring budget, but it changed horror forever. It introduced the world to Michael Myers, a silent, unstoppable shape who seemed less like a man and more like evil itself. And what made him terrifying wasn't what he did, but how little we knew about why he did it. Set in the small fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, Halloween transformed the safety of suburbia into a hunting ground. Ordinary homes, quiet streets, warm autumn nights. Suddenly they didn't feel safe anymore. The film's power came from its restraint, long, patient shots, shadows that moved when you weren't looking, and a score that could make your skin crawl with just 3 piano notes. Jamie Lee Curtis became the face of the final girl, vulnerable yet resourceful, terrified but determined. Her performance grounded the horror in something real. She wasn't a superhero, she was us, running, hiding, praying that locked doors and thin walls would be enough. Halloween didn't just define the slasher genre, it set the tone for modern horror storytelling. It was clean, efficient, terrifyingly simple, and Carpenter's music still lingers like a heartbeat in the dark. Even decades later, that white mask and hollow stare can still stop you cold. It's the fear of what might be waiting just outside your window, and the reason we all double-check the locks on Halloween night. But among all the horrors of the 1970s, the monsters, killers, and nightmares, one film rose above them all. It didn't just frighten audiences, it shook their faith. No other film from the 1970s, or any decade since, has captured pure terror, quite like The Exorcist. When it premiered, audiences fainted, screamed, even ran out of theaters. Churches warned people not to see it, critics called it evil, and yet it became one of the highest-grossing films of all time. 50 years later, it still feels dangerous to watch. The story is deceptively simple. A young girl named Reagan begins acting strange, speaking in tongues, defying gravity, and transforming into something unrecognizable. Her desperate mother turns to 2 priests, one racked with doubt, the other hardened by faith, as they face a force that seems to mock both science and religion. But beneath the spinning heads and levitating beds lies something deeper, a story about belief, guilt, and the fear that no one can save us from the darkness inside ourselves. What made The Exorcist so groundbreaking wasn't just its shocking visuals, it was its conviction. Director William Friedkin treated the supernatural with the seriousness of a documentary. There were no winks, no irony, just cold realism. The horror felt possible. And in a decade marked by war, corruption, and loss of faith that felt terrifyingly close to home, it also changed how we think about fear itself. The film's power comes not from gore, but from the suggestion that evil doesn't hide in shadows, it hides in innocence. Linda Blair's performance as Reagan remains haunting, both tragic and horrifying. She's not the monster, she's the victim of something humanity can't comprehend. The Exorcist didn't just redefine horror, it redefined belief. It made people question everything they thought they knew about good, evil, and the thin line between them. And whether you view it as a story of faith, fear, or pure evil, one thing is certain, it's the film that changed horror forever. The 1970s weren't just another decade for horror, they were the decade that made horror real. These films didn't rely on gimmicks or endless sequels. They reflected the fears of an uncertain world and turned them into art. From the haunted halls of Amityville to the desolate silence of Alien, from the blood-soaked prom of Carrie to the screams echoing through Haddonfield, each one showed us a different face of fear. And that's why these movies endure. They remind us that horror isn't just about monsters or demons, it's about us, our guilt, our grief, our need to understand the unexplainable. So tell us, which of these 70s classics still gets under your skin? Drop a comment below. And if you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you will like this one.